My name is Helen, and I was once a proud mother, a devoted wife, and a quiet force behind a family that always thought of me last. I'm 68 now, a widow retired from my small florist shop that used to sit near the corner of Main Street in our little Ohio town. The shop smelled like roses and cinnamon in winter, and there was something comforting about arranging blooms that would wither in days. At least they were honest about their timelines, something my own daughter never quite mastered. Her name is Maya. She was my only child, a surprise baby born when I was nearly 40, after years of miscarriages and 2 failed rounds of IVF. I used to believe she was my miracle. She had curls like polished walnut and eyes that could hold an entire room hostage. People would say, "Oh, she's so bright. She'll go places." And I would smile, full of a pride that only a mother who waited years to become one can truly understand. I built my life around her future, her education, her whims. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was present. Every parent-teacher meeting, every dance recital, every heartbreak, I was there, steady and soft like warm bread, always giving and rarely asking. When my husband Warren passed away 5 years ago, I thought it might bring us closer. Grief, after all, is supposed to bind the ones who remain. But with Maya, it did the opposite. She grew colder, more distant. She stopped visiting except on birthdays or holidays, and even then her eyes were often glued to her phone. She had married a man named Sean, who worked in tech and spoke with the kind of confidence that made you question your own thoughts before you'd even finish them. He didn't like small talk. He didn't like my house. And I had a feeling he didn't like me either, though he was always polite about it until he no longer had to be. I lived alone in the house Warren and I had built together, a modest 2-story home with chipped siding and a garden full of peonies and tomatoes. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with 42 years of memories. Warren's toolbox was still in the basement. My mother's rocking chair sat by the window. Maya's old bedroom still had the stars glued to the ceiling and a faded poster of some boy band she once swore she'd marry into. The house wasn't just mine. It was the soul of everything I had lived and loved. So when Maya told me one spring morning that she had big news, I braced myself for something joyful, maybe a pregnancy or a new job. She had that glow about her like someone who'd seen the sun from a mountaintop. She didn't even come inside. She just stood on the porch and said it, matter of fact, like she was announcing the weather. I won. 10 million. Lottery. Can you believe it? I blinked, stunned. 10 million. She nodded, laughing, her teeth gleaming. We're moving. Out west. Something big. Better schools for the kids. Bigger house. More space. It's going to be incredible. It was surreal. I felt genuinely happy for her, relieved even. She and Sean had been struggling financially for years. I had quietly helped them when I could, loaned them $15,000 once to help with a business idea that never bloomed. I thought maybe now they'd feel secure. Maybe now they'd have enough to breathe, to slow down. I thought maybe, just maybe, Maya would use a bit of that fortune to lift me too. Maybe help fix the roof. Maybe offer to take me somewhere warm for the winter. Maybe even, though I didn't dare hope, spend more time with me. Not out of guilt, but out of love. But 2 weeks later, I found myself on the edge of my own porch with a suitcase in hand and my keys gently removed from the ring they used to hang on. Maya was standing across from me, her arms folded, her mouth a firm line. "You'll be okay, Mom. You've got your pension, and the place is falling apart anyway. Sean thinks it's time you moved into something easier, a community maybe." I didn't speak at first. I couldn't. My tongue felt like cotton and my chest like concrete. When I finally did, my voice cracked like glass. "You're kicking me out?" She shrugged, and her voice didn't shake. "It's for the best. We want to renovate, and we need the space. It'll be ours now anyway, since it was under your name but listed with the bank. We paid it off for you last year, remember?" I remembered. Of course I remembered. It was my birthday gift. "So you'd never have to worry again, Mom," she had said. I thought it was a gesture of love. I didn't realize it was a down payment on control. I walked away that day without saying goodbye. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment over a bakery on Jefferson Street. The smell of sugar and yeast filled the hallway every morning, and the windows rattled when the delivery truck backed into the alley. It wasn't quiet like home. It wasn't mine. But it was where I learned to breathe again. And as I stood in that cramped living room, staring at the keys I no longer owned, a quiet fire began to build in my chest. They thought they had taken everything. But what they didn't know was that the real winner in this story wasn't holding the check. She was just getting started. The days that followed my departure from the only home I had ever known moved like cold syrup, thick, heavy, and hard to swallow. The apartment above the bakery was small, only 600 square feet at most, with low ceilings that seemed to lean in when I cried. The furniture was borrowed from the landlord's storage unit, stiff, outdated, and smelling faintly of mothballs and neglect. There was no garden here, no creaky floors that told stories beneath my feet, no framed photos of Warren smiling at the grill or Maya in her pink tutu at age 5. It felt like someone had dropped me into a stranger's life, and the only thing that reminded me it was mine was the dull ache sitting permanently in my chest. I tried not to drown in self-pity. I kept telling myself that I was still standing, still breathing, and still alive, and that mattered. But grief is sneaky. It doesn't just show up for death. It arrives for lost homes, for broken trust, for the hollow echo of a child's absence, where love used to live. Each morning, I would sit at the small dining table by the window with a cup of instant coffee and watch people rush down Jefferson Street. They didn't know me. They didn't care that just 2 weeks ago I was someone's mother, someone's matriarch, someone who used to wake up in a home filled with memories and the scent of gardenias. To them, I was just another old woman trying to keep busy, invisible, but not broken. No, never broken. Maya didn't call, not once. No, how are you adjusting? No, do you need anything? I wasn't surprised. Somewhere along the years, her heart had been encased in something cold. Maybe it was Sean's influence. Maybe it was the burden of ambition. Or maybe it was my fault for always giving too much and asking for too little. But even if I couldn't unravel what made her this way, I could begin to protect myself from the aftermath. I started writing everything down. Every payment I'd made toward the house over the years, every gift that was really a loan, every inheritance she'd received from Warren's side that I had quietly administered without asking for thanks. I opened an old shoebox full of receipts, bank statements, and handwritten notes. I created a binder, labeled, organized, factual, because if Maya had turned into someone who respected power more than love, then I would give her the one language she understood: documentation. One rainy Thursday afternoon, the bakery owner downstairs, a cheerful woman named Fran, asked if I wanted to help part-time. Nothing serious, just prepping the display cases before the morning rush. I accepted, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the purpose. I needed something to get me out of bed each day besides bitterness. Fran was kind. She was my age and had a sharp wit that reminded me of who I used to be before life started chipping away at my softness. We talked about everything from local gossip to the rising cost of butter. She had never married, but she understood the ache of family disappointment. She told me once, while kneading dough with a kind of meditative rhythm, "You give and give and give, and then one day, someone you gave everything to throws it all back like it was nothing, and you just stand there, holding the invisible wounds." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was the first time someone had spoken the ache without asking for details. Weeks passed. I adjusted. I even found moments of joy, like when a little boy named Tommy would come in every Friday to buy a cookie with his allowance, or when Fran surprised me with a used but sturdy bookshelf for my growing collection of mystery novels. Life didn't feel like mine yet, but it was beginning to stretch its legs in this new, quieter space. Then one morning, while sorting mail at the apartment, I found an envelope from the county property office. I nearly tossed it, assuming it was junk. but something made me open it. Inside was a formal notice. Maya and Sean had submitted a change of title request for the house. They were claiming sole ownership, retroactively filing documents that excluded my name. My hands trembled. My heart didn't. I had seen this coming. What they didn't know, what they had never thought to check, was that years ago, Warren and I had made quiet updates to the house deed. After nearly losing the property in the 90s during a financial crisis, we had legally split the deed and filed a survivorship clause that included certain triggers in case of death or sudden sale. I had kept my share hidden in a separate trust, accessible only under specific conditions, one of which, ironically, included being forcibly removed or evicted without cause. I never thought I'd need it, but on that day, the cold fire inside me began to flicker with new life. That night, I pulled out the binder again. I reviewed every line of the deed. I contacted the law office Warren had used before he passed. Small town folks, nothing fancy, but thorough. I booked an appointment, and I didn't cry. The next week, Maya showed up at my apartment without notice. Her smile was sharp and brittle, like glass just before it cracks. "Hi, Mom," she said, standing at my doorway, arms folded. "Just wanted to let you know we've started renovations. It's going to be amazing. You should come by sometime, see what we're building." I nodded slowly. "What you're building?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, we've got investors now, too. We're turning the back garden into a guest house. Maybe even a pool. Things are finally happening." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my little girl anymore. I saw a woman I didn't recognize, a woman who had traded softness for control, love for leverage. I could have shouted, I could have cried, but I didn't. Instead, I offered her a glass of water, asked how the kids were, and sent her on her way. Then I called my lawyer. By the end of that month, a legal notice had been delivered to her doorstep. Calm, clean, binding. I wasn't asking for revenge. I was simply asserting the rights she thought I didn't know I still had. And while Maya and Sean scrambled to unravel the trust details, property clauses, and frozen renovations, I sat quietly in my apartment, sipping tea and watching the snow fall outside. They had underestimated me. They thought age meant weakness, that grief meant silence, that kindness meant surrender. But they had forgotten who taught Maya how to fight in the first place. The first hearing was set for a frosty Monday morning in January. The courthouse stood tall and gray against the pale sky, its steps crusted in frozen slush and echoing with each cautious footfall. I hadn't set foot in a courtroom since Warren and I had finalized his father's estate decades ago, but this time I walked in alone. My chin lifted not in arrogance, but in quiet resolve. I wasn't here to tear my daughter down. I was here to protect what was mine, what had been mine all along, and what I had been willing to share until she taught me not to. Maya didn't look at me as we stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her husband, Sean, did most of the posturing, wearing a coat far too sharp for a man who had once lived off my cooking, and smiled as he passed me the mashed potatoes like he had earned his place at my table. He kept checking his phone, jaw tight, trying to mask nerves with entitlement. But Maya... Her eyes flickered once in my direction, and then away. There was no warmth left in them, no guilt either, just cold calculation. Their attorney was young, slick, the kind of man who smiled too confidently while filing petitions that twisted facts into impressions. But he hadn't counted on the trust documentation Warren and I had prepared. He hadn't anticipated the dated but valid survivorship clause buried beneath supplemental filings. Nor did he expect that I, the grieving, displaced widow, had quietly retained a legal firm with a reputation for bulldog tenacity behind their quaint, brick facade. When the proceedings began, my lawyer, Ms. Redford, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a voice like polished oak, laid out our position with a calm clarity that silenced the room. Every financial contribution I had made, Every gift I had deferred, every renovation bill I had personally signed, and then the deed. "That property, Your Honor, is legally shared," she said, "and the plaintiff," she gestured toward me, "was not only forced out without due process, but holds an irrevocable right to her share, per the trust established by her late husband." I didn't flinch. I didn't look at Maya, but Sean's mouth twisted, and his leg bounced under the table like a child's in timeout. It wasn't a full decision that day. These things take time. But the judge ordered a temporary freeze on renovations, halted their attempt to transfer the property title, and demanded full financial disclosures from Maya and Sean, including the details of that now infamous lottery win. They looked stunned, as if the act of winning money had somehow elevated them above law, logic, or legacy. But I had not come to play a game. I had come to remind them of the rules. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around my apartment shifted. I returned to the bakery, but Fran saw the tension in my jaw and the way I stared too long at the rising dough as if I could knead out the pain. She didn't ask for details. She just handed me a blueberry scone and said, "Good women don't burn bridges. They learn how to build better ones. But if someone tries to drown you while you're on it, blow the damn thing up." It made me laugh. Genuinely, for the first time in weeks. That night, I received a text, just one line from Maya. "Why are you doing this to us?" I stared at it for a long time. The irony was bitter. I wanted to reply with a list of reasons, a breakdown of every small betrayal, every insult masked as entitlement, every tear I had swallowed alone in this apartment. But I didn't respond. Silence, I had learned, speaks volumes. Instead, I opened the notebook I had started keeping. Not a journal, not exactly. More like a map of my mind. I filled pages with memories of birthdays Maya no longer remembered, of the time she broke her wrist at age 12 and cried for me, not Sean, not anyone else, me. Of how I stayed awake for 3 nights straight after Warren's diagnosis, planning care schedules, contacting specialists, trying to hold our family together while Maya and Sean took a week-long spa vacation to recharge. The memories hurt, but they also strengthened me. 2 weeks later, another bomb dropped, but this one came with an unexpected glimmer of poetic justice. I learned through a quiet source, a former neighbor, bless her sharp ears and active social media habit, that Sean had attempted to use a portion of the lottery winnings to invest in a local commercial project. But the funds had been frozen due to our pending property case. Not only that, but Maya's name had been removed from one of their joint accounts, which sent her into a tailspin of suspicion. I didn't know all the details yet, but it was clear that cracks were forming. Not just between me and my daughter, but between her and the man she had trusted more than her own mother. A man who had whispered ambitions into her ear, who had convinced her that independence meant isolation, that self-worth came from bank balances and social circles that never invited me in. And yet here I was, still standing. I kept my distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't stir the pot. But I watched. I documented. I spoke only when necessary. Until one day, Maya showed up at the bakery. She wore sunglasses indoors. Her lips were dry, her posture stiff. She waited until Fran walked to the back, then leaned over the counter toward me. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice cracking ever so slightly. "I just wanted my life, my own life." I looked at her then, truly looked. For the first time in months, I didn't see the armored adult she had become. I saw the frightened girl beneath, the one who had once clutched my hand during thunderstorms and whispered secrets into my ear under the covers. But love is not a door that can be reopened without effort, and respect is not a gift returned once discarded. "Maya," I said softly, "your life was never something I tried to take. But you let someone else convince you that loving me meant losing control. That's where we lost each other. Tears formed in her eyes, but I did not reach for her. Not yet. Because healing, I had come to learn, requires more than tears. It requires truth, and we weren't there yet. The days after Maya's visit to the bakery settled into a strange rhythm, one filled with tension that didn't quite break the surface, but hummed underneath like a storm gathering in the distance. She hadn't returned, and I hadn't reached out. There was too much unsaid, too much still heavy in the air, but something in her face that day had lingered with me. Those cracks in her veneer, the smallest suggestion that regret had begun to rot the edges of her ambition. I didn't want her to break down. I wanted her to wake up. There's a difference. Meanwhile, the case progressed slowly but surely. My lawyer continued working quietly, filing every form, presenting every receipt, ensuring every cent I had contributed to that house was accounted for. When Maya and Sean's financial disclosures came in, the truth poured out like wine from a bottle that had been shaken too hard. Sean had siphoned large portions of the lottery money into separate ventures, many of them high risk, and none of them disclosed to Maya until the court order revealed it. He had hidden accounts, multiple, one in the Bahamas, another in her cousin's name. The betrayal stung her far more than mine ever had, because she hadn't seen it coming. Not from him. I knew. I always knew. She may have pushed me aside, but a mother's instincts don't dim with distance. They sharpen. One cold Friday morning, Maya showed up again. This time, not at the bakery, but at my apartment. I didn't rush to open the door. I waited a moment, letting her knock a second time before I slowly turned the lock and swung it open. She stood in a long black coat, her hair undone, her mascara smudged. There was no arrogance in her eyes now, only desperation. "I didn't know," she whispered before I could say anything, "about the accounts, about the money. He told me it was for us, that it was just temporary, but it wasn't." I nodded slowly. "So now you believe what I tried to tell you years ago?" She bit her lip, her voice trembling. "I'm scared." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the same couch where I had once folded her baby clothes, stared at the same picture frame on the wall where Warren and I stood smiling in front of the house that was now divided by lawyers and lies. She cried then, not dramatically, not loudly, but like a faucet with a steady drip, every tear landing with quiet finality. "I thought I was strong," she murmured. "I thought I was building something better." "Strength doesn't come from walking away," I said gently, sitting across from her. "It comes from knowing what you're walking away from." Her eyes met mine, and I saw it. The understanding. The beginning of it, at least. I didn't let her move back in. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about reclaiming her place under my roof. It was about earning back the place she had abandoned in my heart. But we started meeting every Sunday at a neutral cafe. No pressure, just conversation. It wasn't always easy. There were long silences, old wounds reopened, moments where my patience frayed and her guilt swelled. But we kept showing up. Meanwhile, Sean's world was quietly collapsing. One by one, his investment partners pulled out. Lawsuits began circling him like vultures. I received an anonymous tip, most likely from one of his burned partners, that Sean had tried to refinance the house behind Maya's back, and that's when I did something Maya never expected. I stepped in. With my lawyer's help, I issued a temporary injunction based on my ownership stake. The court ruled in my favor again. Sean couldn't touch the house. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't leverage it. Not without my approval. He left her the next week. No note, no goodbye. Just a voicemail that said, "Figure it out yourself." And just like that, Maya found herself standing in the ashes of the life she had burned our relationship to build. But she didn't run this time. She stood her ground. I watched her file a police report. I watched her contact every bank and freeze their accounts. I watched her face the media when a reporter tracked her down with questions about Sean's offshore ventures, and for the first time in years I saw my daughter again, the real one, not the curated, polished version Sean had helped craft, but the girl who once fixed a broken fence in our backyard with duct tape and grit because she didn't want her father to see it sag. That girl was back, and she wasn't crying anymore. Weeks later, we stood outside the house. Our house. Mine, Warren's, and now, by legal division, partially hers again. It hadn't sold yet. Too much press around it. Too many questions. But it stood tall, as stubborn and proud as I had once been in my kitchen, baking pies for a family that would one day forget I was more than a cook. She looked at me, hands tucked into her coat pockets. "I know I have no right to ask," she said, "but if we sell it, would you consider splitting it with me?" I took a long breath, staring up at the gables, the windows where light once spilled onto holidays and laughter. "I'll consider," I said, "but only if you promise me something first. Anything. Never again confuse love with sacrifice. I never wanted you to give up your life for me. I just wanted you to remember that I had one too." Tears welled in her eyes again, but they didn't fall. She nodded, and in that moment the house wasn't the prize. It never had been. The real victory was this. I had become someone she had to reckon with, not a burden, not a background figure, but a woman who refused to be erased. Maya didn't just nod that day in front of the house. She acted. She followed through with something she hadn't done in years. She listened. There was no grand gesture, no social media apology or flowers at my door. Instead, it was her presence that returned, steady and quiet, like spring thawing after a brutal winter. At first, I stayed cautious. Rebuilding with Maya meant stepping carefully across a minefield of old hurts and silent regrets. But even so, I couldn't ignore the fact that she was finally becoming the kind of woman I had always hoped she'd be. Not polished, not perfect, but present, responsible, awake. Meanwhile, things with Sean deteriorated rapidly. Every article that emerged chipped away at the image he had crafted. Headlines ranged from "Lottery Husband's Offshore Secrets Revealed" to "Millions Lost, Where Did the Money Go?" Maya barely read them anymore. The damage had already been done, and she had enough internal wreckage to sort through without the noise of the world screaming, "I told you so." Still, I knew Sean wasn't finished. Men like him never leave quietly. I kept my distance from the house for a few weeks, not because I feared him. Those days were long behind me, but because I wanted Maya to handle it herself. She needed to feel what it meant to protect her own space, not rely on me to step in as a savior. And she did. She changed the locks. She closed the shared accounts. She hired her own attorney, this time one I recommended, and began the process of legally separating every aspect of her life from the man who had nearly ruined it. She was doing the work, slowly, painfully, but with dignity. One Sunday morning, Maya invited me back to the house, not to live, but to see it, to walk through the rooms that had once been filled with both joy and betrayal. I hesitated. There were ghosts in those walls, echoes of slammed doors and harsh words, memories of dinners eaten in silence and footsteps that never turned toward me. But I went. When I stepped inside, the scent hit me first. Lavender and warm cedar, familiar and foreign at the same time. She had redecorated. The harsh, modern coldness was gone. In its place were soft fabrics, framed photos of the past, some even with me in them, and the light had returned. Curtains open, sunlight streaming through. It no longer felt like a museum of someone else's ego. It felt like a home. She led me to the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once stood with coffee dripping down my blouse and my daughter's rage echoing in my ears. Now it was quiet. She placed a cup of tea in front of me. Chamomile, my favorite. "I kept one thing," she said gently, reaching into the drawer. It was a handwritten recipe card, Mine. The one I had scribbled out years ago when Maya wanted to make Warren's favorite banana bread. The card was stained, slightly torn at the edges, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Mine. She had laminated it. "I didn't forget everything," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too large. We sat for over an hour in silence and comfort. No accusations, no apologies. Just the slow rebuilding of something I had assumed was gone forever. Then, the unexpected happened. Maya opened her laptop and turned it toward me. "I want you to see this," she said. It was a bank account, joint, in both our names. It contained half the equity from the sale of the house, which she had finalized without telling me. The property had sold quietly to a private buyer, and Maya had made sure that I received my fair share. Every cent I had invested, every repair I had funded, every renovation I had overseen. "I can't change the past," she said, "but I can start paying back the debt I owe." I stared at the screen. Not for the numbers. I didn't need the money, not anymore. Between the bakery and my careful savings, I was fine. Comfortable even. But what she had done wasn't about dollars. It was about respect. And that's when I realized Maya wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was my peer. A woman who had fallen, hard, but who had chosen to rise again, not on someone else's shoulders, but on her own 2 feet. The final confrontation with Sean happened days later. Maya called me afterward, breathless and shaking. "He tried to guilt me," she said. "Told me I wouldn't have anything if not for him. Said I was ungrateful." I asked her what she said in return. "I told him the truth," she replied, "that he was right. I was ungrateful, because I had no idea how much I had until he tried to take it all away." It wasn't a perfect ending. Maya still had debts to settle, emotionally and financially. Sean was likely to keep digging for ways to claw back whatever he could, but none of that mattered as much anymore, because the foundation had shifted, and when foundations shift, the whole house changes. Later that week, Maya showed up at the bakery with a gift. It was a small framed photograph. In it, I was sitting on the porch of our old house, a younger Maya beside me, both of us laughing over something long forgotten. It wasn't posed, just a real moment, captured. Underneath the photo, she had written one sentence in calligraphy. "You were never the burden. You were the blessing." I cried, not out of sadness, but because I had waited years to feel seen. And now, finally, I was. In the quiet months that followed, life didn't return to the way it used to be. It became something else entirely, something slower, softer, deliberate. I didn't move back in with Maya. I didn't need to. The small house I found just 10 minutes from the bakery became my sanctuary, with a worn wooden porch and ivy that crept up the trellis like it had a secret to tell. I filled the rooms with pieces of my past and symbols of my future, framed recipes, photos of Ruthie, little vases of fresh herbs, and hand-stitched pillows. That said simple things like welcome and still growing. Maya visited often, sometimes with Ruthie, sometimes alone. She never came empty-handed. There'd be a fresh loaf of sourdough from a bakery she found, or a book she thought I'd love, or simply her time, the most precious thing she could now offer. We no longer danced around old wounds. They were part of us but no longer controlled us. It felt like we had stepped out of the shadow of history and into a light we hadn't known was possible. The media storm around Sean eventually quieted. He disappeared from the headlines as quickly as he had entered them. And Maya finalized her divorce, quietly and without drama. She didn't need a public declaration of independence. Her choices, daily, quiet, firm, were her freedom papers. One afternoon in early spring, Maya came to me with a proposal. Not a business plan, not a request, a genuine offer. "I want to partner with you," she said. "I've been thinking, what if we opened something together? A cafe, a space that's not just about food, but about healing, where stories are shared, Generations connect, and no one feels invisible. I looked at her, this woman who had once flung hot coffee in my face, now standing before me asking to build something with me. Not because she needed saving, but because she wanted to grow together. "Only if we call it second chances," I said with a smile, and that's how it began. The cafe opened 6 months later, tucked into a quiet corner of town with soft lighting, shelves of memoirs and cookbooks, and a chalkboard wall where patrons could write one thing they were thankful for each week. People came for the food, but stayed for the warmth, for the way the space felt like a hug you didn't know you needed. I taught baking classes once a week. Ruthie helped with the register. Maya handled the business side, and in between all of it, we learned how to be mother and daughter again. Not because we forgot the past, but because we forgave each other through it. On the 1-year anniversary of the cafe's opening, we hosted a community storytelling night. People brought poems, letters, memories. Some cried, some laughed, some just sat in quiet company. When it was my turn to speak, I looked out at the faces, familiar and new, and I felt something settle in me. "I once thought I had lost everything," I began, my voice steady. "My husband, my home, even my place in my own daughter's life. But sometimes, losing everything clears the path to what truly matters." There was silence, not the kind that makes you nervous, but the kind that lets the words sink in like rain into dry earth. My daughter once believed that money made her powerful, but today we both understand that love, grace, and presence, they are the real wealth, and in that way, we've all become richer. People clapped, but what moved me more was the way Maya looked at me, not like a burden, not like a relic from her past, but like someone she respected, someone she wanted to stand beside. That night, she hugged me outside the cafe. The street lamps flickered gently above us. Ruthie had already fallen asleep in the car, clutching a muffin we'd baked together. "I still have a long way to go," she whispered. "So do I said. "But at least now, we're walking in the same direction." And as I stood there on the sidewalk, feeling the cool spring air kiss my cheeks, I realized that I hadn't just been given a second chance. I had become the second chance. If you've stayed with me through this journey, thank you. This wasn't just my story. It may be yours, your mother's, your sister's, or someone quietly living next door. Sometimes we walk through fire and don't realize until much later that we came out brighter on the other side. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been cast aside only to rise stronger? I'd love to hear your voice. Until the next story, stay kind, stay grounded, and remember, sometimes the ones we count out are the ones writing the ending we never saw coming.